June 5th, 1975, Abbey Road Studios, London. A large man walks into the building. His head is shaved. His eyebrows are gone. He is carrying a plastic bag. He is 29 years old. The band recording in Studio 3 doesn't recognize him. Not at first. Some not at all. Nick Mason, Pink Floyd's drummer, would later describe the moment in Mojo magazine. Seeing Syd was shocking. I didn't recognize him. The song they are recording is called Shine On You, Crazy Diamond. It is a 9-part, approximately 26-minute tribute to a man destroyed by genius and circumstance, and, as we will show, by the calculated indifference of an industry that loved his talent, monetized his breakdown, and moved on. The man in the studio, brushing his teeth, hearing music written about him, showing no sign that he understands any of it, is Syd Barrett. And this is the story of what the music business did to him. Let me be specific about what we're doing here. This is not a story about a man who went mad. Mental illness is not a narrative device. Syd Barrett's psychological collapse was real, it was tragic, and it was not his fault. This is a story about the people and institutions around that collapse and the choices they made. Choices that were not made in Barrett's interest. Choices that were made in the industry's interest. We're going to trace those choices one by one. We're going to name the decisions. We're going to follow the money. And we're going to ask the question nobody in the official record of Pink Floyd's mythology ever seems to answer. Who profited from Syd Barrett's madness, and who paid the real price? You need to understand what Syd Barrett was before you can understand what was done to him. By 1966, he was 20 years old, had arrived in London from Cambridge, and had formed a band with fellow students Nick Mason, Roger Waters, and Rick Wright. He named them Pink Floyd, after two American blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council, whose names he had spotted in the sleeve notes of a Blind Boy Fuller record, and became their singer, lead guitarist, and primary songwriter. Every track on The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, their 1967 debut, recorded at Abbey Road Studios at the same time and in the same building as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, was written by Barrett. Every one. He was the axis around which everything turned, not just creatively, commercially. The label signed Pink Floyd because of Syd Barrett. The management company, Black Hill Enterprises, built their business around Syd Barrett. The industry understood exactly what it had. It also understood, or should have, what it was watching happen. By the summer of 1967, the same year The Piper was released, Barrett's behavior had become genuinely alarming. At performances, he would retune his guitar mid-song and simply hold a chord. He would stand motionless at the microphone. He would arrive at shows and appear not to know where he was. His LSD use was significant. Whether it caused or accelerated an underlying psychiatric condition is a clinical question that was never formally answered, because the industry never insisted on a proper evaluation. What was clear to everyone around him was that something was seriously wrong. And the tour continued. Here is what it looks like when an industry prioritizes commerce over care. It looks like a band getting into a car on the way to a show at Southampton University on January 26, 1968. Someone asks, "Shall we pick Syd up?" Someone else says, "Let's not bother." And they drove past his house. No confrontation, no conversation, no referral to a doctor or a psychiatrist or a family member, no formal discussion of what was happening to him, just a quiet decision made in a moving vehicle that the man who built the band would not be picked up today. Roger Waters, reflecting on this period years later, was remarkably direct about the existential threat Barrett's collapse posed. Speaking to Joe Rogan in October 2022, he put it plainly. If the guy who writes the songs in the band goes crazy, You're fucked, basically. That is a commercially framed response to a psychiatric crisis, and it tells you everything about how the situation was understood at the time. For 2 more months after January 1968, the situation drifted. David Gilmour was brought in as a 5th member, a contingency plan, quietly put in place without Barrett being told. On April 6, 1968, his departure was made official. The same day, Pink Floyd terminated their contract with Black Hill Enterprises, the management company run by Peter Jenner and Andrew King. Black Hill, believing Barrett was the genuine talent, chose to stay with him rather than the band. This has been presented historically as a loyal, principled decision. Perhaps it was partly that, but here is the other reading. Black Hill retained Syd Barrett because they believed he was more commercially valuable than the rest of the band. Staying with Barrett was also, whether they admitted it or not, a financial calculation. So what did they do with him? They put him in a recording studio. It is May 1968. Syd Barrett has been removed from his band. He has been visibly deteriorating for the better part of a year. He has not received a formal psychiatric evaluation. He is 22 years old. Peter Jenner books him into EMI Studios and begins recording what will become his first solo album. It goes badly. Jenner's own admission afterward was unusually candid. I had seriously underestimated the difficulties of working with him. After 2 months of intermittent, increasingly unworkable sessions, Barrett stopped the recordings himself. He returned to Cambridge. He entered psychiatric treatment at a clinic there. A reasonable response might have been, "This man needs time, space, and proper care. Let him recover. See what he wants to do when he is well." That is not what happened. In April 1969, less than a year later, EMI assigned a young label executive named Malcolm Jones to revive the project. The unfinished sessions were picked back up. Jones described Barrett as being in a great mood, in fine form. I want to pause on that. Malcolm Jones was an EMI employee. His job was to deliver a product. We should treat his account accordingly. In July 1969, Roger Waters and David Gilmour entered the sessions to help Barrett finish the record. Gilmour later described what they encountered in a May 2003 interview. "We had very little time. Syd was very difficult. We got that very frustrated feeling. Look, it's your fucking career, mate. Why don't you get your finger out and do something?" The guy was in trouble and was a close friend for many years before then, so it really was the least one could do. The guy was in trouble. Those are Gilmour's own words. And the album, The Madcap Laughs, was released in January 1970 regardless. I want you to listen to that album with this knowledge. Not to appreciate it as an artifact of fragmented genius, which it has been called many times by many critics. Listen to it as a document of what was happening to a man in real time. The false starts left in the mix. The guitar playing that wanders out of tune and doesn't come back. The performances that trail off into silence. These weren't left in for artistic integrity. They were left in because there wasn't enough usable material without them. The album needed to be finished. The album was finished. The title? The Madcap Laughs. Madcap, an eccentric, a lovable fool, a wild-eyed dreamer. It is a word that aestheticizes psychiatric breakdown, that transforms a man in genuine distress into a charming mythology. The madcap, the crazy diamond. Branding, all of it, applied to a man who never consented to being a brand. A second album, simply titled Barrett, followed in November 1970, produced again by Waters and Gilmour. The same pattern, the same result. After that, Syd Barrett never released another record. He was done by the age of 24. Pink Floyd spent the next decade becoming the most commercially successful progressive rock band in history. The Dark Side of the Moon, released in 1973, spent 741 weeks on the Billboard 200 chart in its first 15 years of release, a record that has never been broken. It has sold over 45 million copies worldwide. EMI noticed. Almost immediately after Dark Side's success, the label reissued the Barrett-era Pink Floyd albums, Piper at the Gates of Dawn and A Saucer Full of Secrets, as a double compilation called A Nice Pair. The intent was explicit. New Pink Floyd fans should be introduced to the band's origins. When that sold well, particularly in America, EMI compiled Barrett's solo work to meet the demand. The man was living quietly in Cambridge. The machinery was running without him. In 1975, Pink Floyd released Wish You Were Here. The centerpiece was Shine On You Crazy Diamond, 9 parts, approximately 26 minutes, built around a 4-note motif that Waters had associated with Barrett for years. It was the most overt tribute the band had ever paid to their lost founder. It was also one of their most commercially successful albums. I am not saying Wish You Were Here was made cynically. Roger Waters' grief is evidently real. In a 1975 interview, as the album was being completed, he said, "I'm very sad about Syd. I wasn't for years. Of course he was very important, and the band would never have fucking started without him, because he was writing all the material." That grief is real. But we should be able to hold two things simultaneously: the emotional truth of the tribute and the commercial reality of the transaction. Pink Floyd's career was, in significant part, built on the mythology of Syd Barrett's tragedy. His breakdown gave them their emotional depth. His absence gave them their legend. His madness gave the music industry a story it has been selling ever since. And then, June 5th, 1975, Abbey Road Studios. The man the myth was built on walked into the room. He was 29 years old. His head and eyebrows were shaved. He had gained significant weight. He was carrying a plastic bag. He had told people he had been eating compulsively, living in isolation. Nobody recognized him, not immediately. Possibly not at all in the first moments. David Gilmour eventually told Nick Mason who the visitor was. Waters reportedly broke down when he realized. He sat and listened to Shine On You Crazy Diamond. He showed, according to multiple accounts, no signs of understanding that the song was about him. He brushed his teeth. He attended Gilmour's wedding reception in the EMI canteen. He left unnoticed. That image, a man rendered invisible by the very industry that had turned his suffering into legend, is the most damning image in the entire history of rock and roll. In 1988, with Barrett still alive and living in Cambridge, EMI released Opal, a collection of vault outtakes, unreleased recordings, and alternative takes from the 1968 to 1970 sessions. The label's stated motivation was to combat the bootleg market that had grown up around Barrett's cult reputation. Barrett gave his approval. But consider what that means. A man who had spent 16 years living in deliberate isolation from the music industry was asked to approve the release of recordings made during the worst period of his psychological life. Recordings that documented his breakdown in real time. The conversation around that approval, what he was told, what he understood, what he wanted, is not part of the official record. The reissue cycle continued. 1993, all 3 solo albums remastered, released individually and as the Crazy Diamond box set. 2010, a further remaster. 2023, Third Man Records reissued the catalog with new artwork, introducing Barrett to an entirely new generation of listeners. Syd Barrett died on July 7, 2006, aged 60, from pancreatic cancer. He had lived quietly in Cambridge for decades. He had, by his own choice, removed himself entirely from the music industry. He painted. He gardened. He lived, by all accounts, a reclusive and simple life. His death was followed within months by a significant commercial response. Tribute albums, biographies, documentary films, renewed critical reassessment, expanded reissue campaigns. The myth consumed the man. And when the man was gone, the myth accelerated. So, what is this story about? It's not about whether Syd Barrett was a genius. He was. It's not about whether the music made from his breakdown has value. It does. Some of it is extraordinary. It's not even about assigning a single villain. There is no one person in this story who stands up cleanly as the monster. Peter Jenner believed in Barrett. Roger Waters genuinely mourned him. David Gilmour has spent decades as a careful guardian of his legacy. But somewhere between the care individuals may have felt and the decisions institutions made, a man in psychiatric crisis was put in a recording studio, had his breakdown packaged and titled "The Madcap Laughs," and was released into the world as a saleable mythology. The label never stopped reissuing the recordings. The band never stopped performing songs about him. The commercial cycle never stopped turning. And Syd Barrett, the actual human being, brushed his teeth in Abbey Road, heard music about himself, understood none of it, and slipped out of a wedding reception unnoticed. The mad genius archetype is one of the most durable fictions in the history of Western culture, and it is almost always convenient for someone other than the genius. It explains the erratic behavior. It excuses the industry's inaction. It aestheticizes the suffering. It sells records. The question I want to leave you with is not, was this exploitation? Because it was. The question is, what would accountability actually look like? Not blame. Accountability. What would it mean for an industry to say, we saw a man deteriorating, we kept recording him, we built a mythology from his decline, and we made money from it for decades after his death? What would it mean to say that honestly, and to decide to do it differently next time? Because the next time is always coming. The mad genius is always a young person in a recording studio somewhere being handed a microphone while the label quietly calculates the upside. Syd Barrett was 22 years old when he recorded The Madcap Laughs. He was 29 when his former bandmates didn't recognize him. He was 60 when he died. The album still sells.